It's Sunday, you know what that means. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. In the wake of the patch and the nerf to the absolute tippy top mid-range deck Victoria Hand, which lost a point of power on V-Hand herself and a point of power on Quinjet, the race to figure out what the next best thing to do in this modern day and confusing world of point output decks is on. This list comes from Honifer, and it is basically leaning on hidden information. I think the proper way to interpret this list is as a Sarah Tech type of deck, but instead of doing the things that are bad, like Sarah, we're doing things that are good, like Anti-Venom. It's no secret that I am a bit of an Anti-Venom partisan, but what this deck is managing to do is do point output well, have information hidden, and generally, if you're able to manage the games where your output is good, interact with your opponent profitably with cards like Shadow King, Stardust, and Legion. You are a little bit light on points compared to Victoria Hand, which was half a synergy deck with some tech in it, and I do think that that is a meaningful downside to this list. If anything, I would describe this list almost as this is the equivalent for a techie mid-range deck of being the ramp deck, in the sense that your points are very limited because you are not doing any of these like multiplicative stacking things, and you do have a decent amount of points. There's some efficient bodies in here, but a lot of what actually makes you a viable deck is your ability to run these specific interactive pieces. In the case of this deck, it's the Shadow King stuff. In the case of the ramp deck, it's all of those 5-cost tech cards. Weirdly, I think of those decks as cousins, and between those two decks, you have a lot of coverage against almost all of the matchups that you're going to regularly see. I almost think that if you could mix them together somehow, or their matchup spreads together somehow, you'd have a lot of really powerful stuff. But the big story here is not necessarily that this deck is the greatest thing ever. I really enjoy it. I think it's very good. Stats suggest it's also pretty good, but I don't want to sit on that. What I really think this deck indicates is that mid-range is now a very open category. Until something claims that crown, many things will be fighting for the title of Best Shadow King deck. Part of the reason people are fighting for that is the introduction of Maverick into the game. Maverick has been a very powerful card that is poorly positioned by virtue of its own power. This card is so powerful that it sort of necessitates people play things that are good against it. You'll notice I talk about mid-range in the context of Best Shadow King deck, the ramp deck, pretty clearly the best Cosmic Ghost Rider deck. It's not a coincidence that one of those things is really good against the output of this deck, and the other one of those things is really good against the input of this deck. This is a deck that is, to a certain degree, warping the meta around itself in ways that open up possibilities for other decks, but it's impossible not to talk about this as one of the best lists in the game because it is strong enough to do that. This deck outputs massive, massive, massive amounts of points and dictates to other people what decks they are allowed to play. To me, this is sort of the base combo deck. If you're gonna play a different combo style deck, what you're gonna wanna do is take that combo style deck and compare it to this and say, I'm sure I have more numbers than this. Because if you're not sure you have more numbers than this, you better be sure you're dodging the common interaction better than this, because this deck has a better mid-range backup plan than any other combo deck. That's the main appeal. When we talk about mid-range decks fighting for the title of Best Shadow King deck and how they're all sort of in this weird, I'm almost a Sarah deck, but I'm not because that's not very good space, this is another one of those lists. This list is, of course, the Annihilus mid-range list that Sizer popularized, although, frankly, I myself am counting down the days until I can take the Annihilus package out of this list and put Xiao Lao in. For those who are unfamiliar, Xiao Lao looks like the next big build-around 5-drop stat guy, and I feel like this deck is crying out for a really good 5-drop stat guy, because Annihilus and, of course, his best friend Sentry, not great. it's fine. It's a fine thing to do, but they are by far the weakest part of this deck, and the strongest part of this deck is like every other card in it, and I think that that is a really notable weakness that this deck has, is that its big endgame stuff is just at best fine. Annihilus is a fine thing to do. It's nothing special, though. The special stuff in this deck is the suite of tech cards it's able to bring to bear. It is Merlin and Werewolf. It is making a claim to being the best Shadow King deck. It is all of this cheap interaction. With the nerf to V-Hand, I do feel like this deck has the easiest claim on being the best mid-range deck, contested only by that other list we talked about. When we talk about who is fighting to be the best Shadow King deck, those are the 1 and 2 seeds. Everything else, I think, is a bit of a notch below. Much like my jacket, Ramp has been here the whole time, and nothing about it has changed except why it's good. Ramp is still a deck that is able to output a decent amount of points, but to me, the thing that keeps it in this metagame is that it's secretly the mid-range deck that can actually play the expensive tech cards. Like, you'll see people playing, you know, Living Tribunal or whatever, and most decks can't afford an Enchantress, but you can. You see people playing Maverick Combo, and most decks can't afford a Cosmic Ghost Rider, but you can. That group of 5s, right? Like the 5s that you have access to here, Legion, Enchantress, and Cosmic Ghost Rider, I'm not saying they're the reason the deck exists, but I think they're the reason it has this level of staying power, because that just allows you so much coverage against so many different things that if you effectively look at this not as a ramp deck in the sense that what we're doing with the ramp is outputting a lot of numbers, right? We're not like a small combo deck here. What we are is like a big tech deck. Because we're a ramp deck, we're the only deck that actually gets to play those cards. And that puts this deck in a very unique spot in the metagame that I've thought that ramp was kind of not a flash in the pan, but something close to that before. And demonstrating this level of staying power by virtue of how expensive tech cards are, when you look at the real mid-range decks, none of them play 5-cost tech cards, really. They're all like 4s or 3s. None of them are doing 2 5-cost tech cards. That's just not a thing they can do. And so this deck has that Arishem thing built in where it has enough energy to just run all the expensive tech. And that means that it genuinely does occupy a niche. And I kind of think it will continue to occupy said niche going forward as long as it's valuable to have these multiple big 5 options. This deck is just legit. I think the ongoing deck is quite underrated right now. This is a deck that I guess I'm always a little bit higher on than a lot of other people are, but just the natural combination that it has of being the kind of deck that is really, really strong into opposing Shadow King decks, while having a similar style to a lot of the Maverick decks. It's this half mid-range, half combo deck that can play point for point small ball scaling with your Sam Wilson Captain America stuff. But if you read that your opponent doesn't have any meaningful interaction for you, can also go exponential in a really powerful way. It just feels like a really well-positioned deck that is set up extremely nicely in a metagame that is focused pretty heavily on Shadow King. Like, I talk about the ramp stuff, and the ramp stuff is definitely not a great matchup for this because of Cosmic Ghost Rider, because of Enchantress. You're definitely not happy to see it, but I don't think a lot of people are on the same page about ramp as I am. I see a lot less of it than you'd think for a deck I think is that good. And as long as people are like, let's be the best Shadow King deck we can be, I think that this deck is going to be in a position to take advantage of those people. Speaking of taking advantage of Shadow King gamers, I mean, Cerebro 3, I can't say enough good things about Cerebro 3. Like, it is just a good deck. There's really nothing else to say. I've said so many different things about why this deck is good, but fundamentally, if people are playing Annihilus mid-range, you just make them look stupid. You just do. They look dumb for even selecting the deck. Like, it's a really annoying thing for them to see a Cerebro happen. And yeah, you know, it's bad when things go bad for you and you get, I don't know, like they manage to mess up your location somehow and you instantly lose the game on Cerebro. But I think it's notable. I got a comment the last time I talked about Cerebro where someone was like, I can't play Cerebro because every time I lose, it's because of the locations. And it's like, no, you need to flip that around. You should be playing Cerebro because the only times you lose are because of the locations. People have been playing a bit less of the discard stuff, and like, I get it, but I actually think this deck is pretty solidly positioned right now, and I know a lot of the time people are just playing it because Weapon H is good. I understand that, but this is actually still kind of legit. Like, I don't want to overstate that this is like a really good deck or anything like that, but as long, again, like there's just this thing where it's like the same dynamic as Cerebro, where it's like, all right, well, if you're going to play a Nihilist, that's just embarrassing for you. Like, you're going to be like an Nihilist Shadow King deck. You should feel bad about that when you play this matchup, right? If you're going to play like some fair stuff, I just don't think you're going to be able to do that. Like, I just think that you're going to lose to the numbers that I'm going to put on the board when I play my discard cards. And that's just really kind of it here. This is basically a deck that is just all points all the time. But because it dodges a lot of the common interactive stuff, like you look at the ramp matchup, and again, like, yeah, they have things they can do against you, right? But your numbers are so good that if you make them take off their point development to play like Cosmic Ghost Rider Enchantress, you can still win that game because they spent turn 4 and 5 playing combined 14 power. And it's just like, yeah, okay, like that's fine by me. I'm going to keep doing that because you're doing your output while advancing your game plan, right? Like you got Zombie Power Man discarding, all that stuff. It's already happening. I think this deck is a little bit slept on. I really do. Don't tell anyone, but Victoria Hand really isn't that bad. I do think it's fairly likely that it ends up third place in the mid-range category or second place or something like that, rather than what it was, but it's not that bad. Like, yeah, Quinjet got over nerfed, but it's not that bad. Functionally, you lost like 2 to 3 points per game. Like, that's bad, but it's not like, oh god, how horrifying. It's not like I'm going to stop copying Victoria Hands, right? It's not going to stop me from doing that. In fact, it makes me want to do that more, and nothing else about this deck is different. Like, it's exactly just the same deck with a couple of points taken off, and yeah, that matters, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like it doesn't matter. It's why Victoria Hand is this far down in the tier list and not really high up at the top end of the tier list, but it is not as big of a deal as the play rate might suggest. I have seen very little of this deck. I think that is a misevaluation. People are playing much worse decks than this deck currently is. And that is just misevaluating like what the level of power is. I mean, I realize that people aren't making like perfectly rational decisions. This isn't like an Econ 101 assumption here, right? But people are low on this deck, lower than they should be. And I get it. You know, it was really good for a really long time. A lot of people are finally happy. They have options to play something else. They don't feel like they're throwing when they play another deck. I totally understand that. It's still pretty good. Occupying what I think I'd reasonably call the hella spot of this tier list is, of course, Nimrod Piper. Now, this is a deck that just does some stupid things. That's really the whole intent of it. But what really the addition that this deck got with this season is Fastball Special combined with Adamantium Infusion. This allows you to do things like chuck a Black Panther at your opponent and then revive that Black Panther with even more power. That kind of stuff is pretty damn good. So when you're able to do that kind of thing, when you're able to do Symbiote Spider-Man into Black Panther, into throw that Black Panther at your opponent, as long as that wins that lane, the Adamantium Infusion is going to win another lane. And that kind of thing is a really dangerous setup punchline because they need to figure out whether you're going to do that or if you're going to do Arnim Zola. And so if you're going to Zola, well, okay. If they're Zolaing, I need to play for the other 2 lanes and I'm going to win this one for free. If it's not, like, it just adds a whole little extra wrinkle onto how this plays out. Of course, you still get absolutely blasted by things like Cosmo, which is actually why the Aranya is in there. The Aranya is mostly there to, when people are going to Cosmo Juggernaut, like your various Nimrod-related shenanigans, when that kind of stuff is there, you have the ability to move it around. It's not as good as when you had Ghost Rider, but it does give you some extra points of power. Like, there's times where that will matter. But largely what this deck is trying to do is exactly what this deck has always tried to do, and it's do something really stupid. You can also do the same kind of play with Nimrod, right? Like, there's some really cool, like, if you have the buffed Nimrod, you chuck it at your opponent and then revive it somewhere else, or revive it in the same lane, or you chuck it at your opponent and then blow up Nimrods elsewhere. Like, this card costing 2, Fastball Special, is a really big upgrade to this deck. It is a bigger upgrade than Adamantium Infusion, in my opinion, because it just gives you more ability to weave things that blow up other things into your Nimrod curve. It's a really big deal that this card costs 2 and not 3. And I think that that is going to be the biggest strength of this card. I've seen some really interesting high Evo energy shenanigan decks going on. I know that Roram has been playing some that involve Professor X. I think that as the kind of person that I am, it's natural that I am biased towards the one that is a Cosmo Juggernaut deck. That should come as no surprise to anybody. This is, of course, high Evo in a Cosmo Juggernaut shell. Notice, of course, we also have my boy Superior Spider-Man in here. At this point, you should be very familiar with how Superior Spider-Man Cosmo Juggernaut decks work, where, like, you just sort of fill in the blanks with the other 9 cards, and it's just some amount of points that you really want to get. And then you have Cosmo Juggernaut and, like, a bunch of points on the final turn of the game, and that's kind of the whole deal. This is a deck that does things. The card that I actually think is probably the worst card in here is Shang-Chi. He's in here mostly to, like, just get people. Like, people don't play around that card anymore. Like, they're not supposed to, but, like, you can just get someone with a Shang-Chi now. Like, the ramp decks will just, like, play a Shang-Chi-able guy on turn 5, and you'll be like, okay. Like, there is just kind of, like, a lot of, like, nobody plays around him anymore, so I'm just going to start blowing stuff up. Now, bad news, there are decks that naturally play around him. The Annihilus decks, by virtue of playing such a mid-ass late game, is they just don't have anything that's ever going to get big enough for you to Shang-Chi. Some of the other mid-range decks are kind of in that spot as well. So I do think he's like a very flexible card here. Like, if you want to mess around with basically any card in that spot, like, go put a Shadow King in there. Sure. Like, yeah, it's probably the right decision. You can do a lot of stuff here. I think that whoever put this list together, A, I love you, big fan of anything doing Cosmo Juggernaut, but B, I really want to draw your attention once again to Superior Spider-Man, who I feel like this has been the prediction that I have gotten the most right about any card, where it's like, yeah, he's going to come out and people aren't going to think he's that good, but in 6 months, everyone's going to be like, I should have gotten Superior Spider-Man. This dude keeps showing up. He keeps showing up. The longer he's been out, the more people have found ways to use him. The more people have just been like, yeah, you know, having that 7th energy on the final turn, that's really good. I've got a lot of easy ways to make it happen. I've got a Sunspot. I've got an Agony. I've got a Misty Knight. I've got a Herbie if I have to. It's gonna happen. If I get any in my early game, the dude is just on, and that's enough. It should also come as no surprise that I am still playing the Iris version of this list. I think I might be the last person on Thing First Steps Island. That's fine. I'm willing to be that. He's definitely worse. Like, he's definitely a worse card than he was, but I just like having the option to have a card that interacts with, like, this, you know, these Maverick-y lanes where you just like, I'm setting up a Jocasta combo. It's like, no, you're not, right? Like, I like having that. I think that that kind of thing is a useful piece of what this deck brings to bear, and I think the rest of the scaling is a very solid piece of scaling. Juggernaut Cosmo deck, great Craven and Batroc and Sam Wilson scaling, interaction and power at the top end with, of course, Thing First Steps. I've got nothing bad to say about it. I think it is a very solid choice. Similar vibe here with the Ika Tech pile list. It's just, like, kind of mid. It's the kind of mid that I love. It's, like, my favorite kind of mid. And I do think it's a reasonable attempt, but I find it hard to look at this list and look at the Iris list and be like, I would rather play this one. I think this list is doing a bunch of really cool and interesting things, but if you're going to play like an old school mid-range deck, I think the list we talked about at the beginning of the episode is probably a better option here. But there are still some cool things this deck is doing. The Danger stuff is really disruptive into various Jocasta decks. Even though Danger is the world's most mediocre card, she does do some reasonable stuff into Maverick matchups. She does approximately 0 things into a ramp deck, and against a ramp deck, a lot of the time you are leaning on Shang Fenris because that is the kind of thing you're going to have to deal with. I think you have a lot of game into a lot of stuff, but to me, this reads like 48% win rate deck that really good players pick up and take to 52% win rate, and they're like, well, this is good. I think that for the average person, this is going to be a little bit lackluster, just by virtue of lacking some of the output other lists may have. I don't really know what to do with this deck. Like, I kind of think it's good. I kind of think Zombie Galacti is good. I kind of think Nimrod is good. I kind of think there's a lot of like these decks that are just like, when you look at the texture of the metagame, there's just kind of a great deal of Shadow Kinging and cheap tech cards and stuff that doesn't really deal with these decks that are like, I guess you'd call them sort of middle of the pack combo decks that are like kind of hard to execute, but nobody's really stopping you in a meaningful way. And until people start actually trying to stop you, you kind of just beat the crap out of them with these like point vomit decks like this and Nimrod, where it's like, oh yeah, no, that does exist, and I definitely do lose to it. Yeah, no, that definitely does happen, right? I think this deck has some extra cube equity built into it because people have sort of, like, in their head, they've, Zombie Galactus card is awful, right? Who plays that card? It's terrible. And then you lose to it, and you're like, okay. Like, there is, like, a little bit of, like, built-in opposing arrogance when it comes to this deck that makes it a little bit hard to measure, like, how reproducible the results are. But I do actually kind of think this deck has some juice. I'm not saying it's amazing, but I am saying it's probably better than you think it is. Last up, back in on the destroy spot of this tier list, it's Destroy! Yay! I mean, there's nothing bad I can say about a Destroy deck. It is just a very, very solid, to me, the floor for what a meta deck should be. I do think it is a very reasonable choice right now. You just have to be very in tune with your own deck. The delta between your good hands and your bad hands is very strong. You have to be good at reading what your opponent is very early because you don't want to snap into something that's actually going to be able to meaningfully counter you. But this is a deck that has fundamentally some really powerful hands and some really not powerful hands, and it cares a lot about getting access to its ceiling as early as it possibly can. It does strong things occasionally, and the rest of the time it just plays a relatively fairer game of Marvel Snap. I can say absolutely nothing bad about this deck. I think it is the bar for being a metagame deck. If you are not better than this, you probably are not one. Which brings us to my boy Dormammu, who is kinda sucking it up right now. I see a lot of this deck, and I have no respect for it. And I think it's pretty bad, and it's kind of like if you caught me in a dark alley and you had me up against the wall and you were like, right now, what's the worst deck a lot of people play? I would probably have to tell you it's this. And I think that is, the true destroy spot has been taken by Dormammu. I don't have anything against this deck. It's just like, okay, it's 2023. Like relax, bro. Like, this is not, we don't do Mockingbird death anymore. Like, just chill. We've evolved so far past this. Stop trying to make it happen. Like, it's fine. It's like, it's slightly worse than every other deck that does points, and it has less interaction than every other deck that does points, and you're making a giant Weapon X who gets Shadow Kinged by every other deck that does points. Just chill. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.